This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joire.
Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joire, and today is Wednesday, June 5th, 2019, and my guest is no other than the implacable Rene Ritchie. Hi, Rene, how are you?
Hi, Miriam. How are you? It's so great to talk to you.
Thanks. Well, thanks for being on, and it's Worldwide Developer Conference, Dub, as some people like to call it, in San Francisco, and at Apple's, well, it's San Jose, really, technically. Yeah. And you're there, of course, because you are my guiding light when it comes to all things Apple.
Well, you give me photography tips, and I'll give you Apple tips.
There you go. So I kind of obviously have seen the news, but I think we're both very good at analysis. So I kind of want to do, maybe together, talk a little bit about what's been going on and what we think about it. I think for me, the standouts, it's not a mobile device, although I am going to be in denial and say that because it's configurable with wheels,
yes,
I will make it a mobile device, because you cannot just, if you're a tech nerd, even if mobile technologies are primary focus on this show, you cannot walk past the Mac Pro news and say whatever, at least in my opinion.
Yes, it's like walking by an Aventador and saying whatever.
Exactly. So what do you think?
I think it's interesting in two ways. One, I think the way that they announced it showed that they learned from the previous cylinder Mac Pro that they really couldn't make an appliance and satisfy anybody.
Cylinder Mac Pro? Not the V12 twin turbo Mac Pro?
They needed to make something that people could get inside and configure. But also, they clearly identified an ultra high-end segment of the market like Pixar, ILM, I guess, Marquez Brownlee, because I think it costs about as much as one of his cameras.
Exactly. I was going to say, anybody who's using a red camera right now is like, cha-ching.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
And they need it. So
yeah, so like they had a whole we went across the street and they had a bunch. Apple 2 years ago, they set up a pro workflows team and they recruited people from Pixar and ILM and all the big studios and record labels to come inside Apple and work on all of Apple's projects, so they could literally complain constantly to the hardware and software. This dialogue is too slow. This bus isn't fast enough. And they used that team to make this. So they had members of that team inside showing us like Final Cut Pro with 3 streams of 8K, or the entire set from Toy Story, where they showed just inside a little building, and then the whole building, and then the whole fair, and then the whole part of the city that the fair was in Hydra, like just throwing and those are the use cases they built for.
I think it's phenomenal. Look, it's not for me, right? Obviously, I don't need it. I can't afford it. Number one, number two, but I think that the pros have needs, and I love when Apple just says, okay, let's just do this right. And I just don't feel they've done this in a really long time, at least on the Mac side of things. I mean, the iMac Pro is an interesting, piece of hardware for sure, but I feel like this is really what people wanted. And if you are, basically a pro of any kind, I think right now, and you have the budget, you're not going to flinch an eye when you see these prices. I think a lot of people are a little taken aback by that, but this is Apple in true form, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like Alex Lindsay is probably going to buy a dozen of them, like normal people buy eggs. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah, he's going to chain them to his desk, like all in a row.
No, but I think that's very true. And there is pushback. I think I first saw it when Apple released the 12-inch MacBook, the one that you and I were just talking about before, because a lot of our mutual friends just they kept posting pictures of their hands full of dongles, and I wanted to pick them up and carry them to the other table and say, look, here's the MacBook Pro for you. But we were in this mindset where every new Apple product had to be for us. We just wanted to buy all of them. And when they weren't, we sort of thought that Apple lost its way because it's not for me. And this clearly shows that Apple has matured its product lineup enough that they're starting to segment based on user base. And not all of us are going to fall into every one of those segments.
Absolutely. And I'm well known for being a masochist with a first-gen MacBook 12-inch as my travel computer. And look, honestly, if it still ticks so well, it's insane. I'm on my original battery. I'm still getting about 80% of my battery life. I have to manage my tabs. But other than that, like if I just don't demand too much in terms of memory management, memory use, it it's fine. Like I do my rendering in my of my movies on that Mac sometimes, and it's slow. But I just I go get a coffee. It's not like it's not ridiculously slow. I don't do 4K to be honest, so I do one to 1080p. But at 1080p, I can render in almost real time. I mean, and that's fine. It's like that's all I need. I'm definitely waiting for that ARM Mac. You and I discussed that way back. That's what's gonna be, unless this thing breaks, is gonna be what I replace it with. If it breaks, honestly, I'm not quite sure. What I really love right now is the Air potentially, but it's a little big. So if I'm gonna go that big, maybe the MacBook without a touch bar. But that's getting old. They haven't updated that in a while, so I really don't know what I would do, frankly.
You want to wait for that sexy new bezel-free MacBook Pro that's in the works.
Well, so I was just gonna, that's kind of where I was at. I'm glad you read me. I am kind of wondering. I feel to me like there's a big gaping hole in every pro's heart right now, which is the MacBook Pro. And I'm not saying that because the MacBook Pro is a bad computer today. I think the MacBook Pro is not the computers Pro want. And and in the same way as the trash can one cylinder Mac Pro was really kind of exciting for about a minute if you were a Pro. And I feel like it's Dave Lee talked a lot about the thermal kind of limitations of the chassis design. Do you think that's the biggest issue that other than the keyboard that everybody's well aware? I mean, we all wish for a different keyboard. I think hopefully this latest update to the Butterfly keyboard will fix things. But we all feel that I'm kind of jonesing from the previous gen MacBook keyboard. Frankly,
so I mean, the rumor for the next MacBook Pro is that new smaller bezel display, but also us going back to the scissor switch model with the inverted T and the physical escape key. So
T. Oh my God,
so something developed, like people who type for a living like us and people who develop for a living like you really want. But so I love Dave Lee. I think he's fantastic. And he's one of the few exceptions. But I think in general, most people don't understand modern silicon architecture when it comes to what Intel and Apple are doing, or in Intel's case, not doing, because they still haven't managed to get off that 17 nanometer node. And these MacBooks were designed for Intel to be on a 10 nanometer node, which is roughly equivalent to Taiwan Semiconductor's 7 nanometer, which is what Apple's A series silicon is on. So they were designed for a future that never materialized, where they would have been fine in terms of the thermals. But because Intel couldn't do that, in order to stay relevant, they did their old trick of just throwing more cores at it, and Apple suddenly had because. And it's silly to think of this, but Apple has they have limited ID resources. Johnny's team is not big, and they have a set list of things they're trying to get through, and they just weren't able to redesign the MacBook Pro any faster, so they were stuck with putting these bigger, hotter, hungrier chips. At the same time, we have way too many YouTubers and bloggers who all they know how to do is download Geekbench and Intel toys and run benchmarks and repeat the words thermal constraint. So these chips, they are thermally constrained, but the way that modern architecture works, first, those benchmarks do not sample enough to actually see the frequency changes in the chips. And second, Apple philosophically has no problem running at thermal limits. So their whole
I know that, and I think that's cool. I personally don't have a problem with them running a thermal limit. I mean, it's a design choice. It's okay. It's an acceptable,
like the Apple Watch, original Apple Watch ran at thermal limits its entire life.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. Yeah, no.
But the last thing I was going to say is just that the chips could run faster in a bigger chassis, but they are still running much faster than the previous generation. So if you're a super geeky nerd and you care about maximum sustained frequency, it's a complete bummer. But if all you want, like if you're actually working in production and all you want is 20% more speed, it delivers the exact more speed.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. So it's interesting. I mean, I want to go back to the Mac Pro, but I'm glad we're having discussion on mobile, because this is really, for me, what I'm really the most excited about. I'm a huge Mac fan, as you know, more than anything else Apple does. Yeah. And so for me, seeing this Mac Pro is like, this means we might see a MacBook Pro that finally feels more in tune with what the audience is looking for. And so you've talked about, returning to scissor switches and to having an inverted T keyboard and of course the bezel-less and a different thermal design and enclosure. I love the form factor of the MacBook Pro as it is today. I'm not complaining about the weight and size. I don't want it to be necessarily bigger. So, whatever Apple needs to do to make it more, more efficient in terms of being able to accommodate Intel's future roadmap and potentially their own ARM future roadmap,
Yes.
right? I'm on board. My big thing is the touch bar and
Yeah.
the ports. I mean, the ports are not a big thing for me, but I understand those people who want some of the ports. I'll give you an example. I have a Huawei MateBook X Pro, which is kind of like basically a MacBook Pro clone, running Windows. And it's so nice to have one port that's USB Type A, like just one.
Yep. Yeah.
The other two are Thunderbolt 3, and they charge, and they do USB, and they do everything, and then you have a headphone jack. And so it's like 4 ports, I guess, and it's perfectly fine. The only thing I think a lot of pros are going to want is a full-size SD slot.
Yeah.
And I think,
me especially.
honestly, look, I know Apple tries to like go, look, this stuff is done with, it's in the past, but the reality is SD is not in the past. We're continuing to use it, right? All of us, for better or for worse. The form factor continues to evolve in terms of its performance in the same physical card size. So why doesn't Apple, do you think, or the question is more, do you think they'll go back to that?
I don't know. I think the biggest mistake they made with those MacBook Pros is, there was that moment when Steve Jobs slammed the the iPad down on the table in front of the Mac team and said, "Why can't you do this?" And from that point on, I think they went the wrong direction for many years. Not the wrong spirit, but the wrong implementation. And they eventually made the MacBook Pro that they thought would bring way more mainstream consumers because Apple's always had a tiny market share with the Mac, would bring way more consumers the way they'd done with iPad. But I think it's noble to try to make more people into pros, but with the ports, previously we all had dongles. Like I had FireWire dongles and VGA and
we all
HDMI.
had some dongles.
Yeah, pros were used to it. But now because everybody used USB-A, everybody needed a dongle. So you had a machine that drove mainstream people crazy because of the dongles and pros crazy because it wasn't a high-end pro machine and made nobody happy.
So that's kind of, I mean, to me, I can see them never going back to USB-A. That's fine. I can understand that. I personally don't need it because I have an entire universe of C devices now. What is it? 4 years into it or 5 years into it with my MacBook. And then of course, all my Android phones that have had USB-C since the OnePlus 2. I've got a huge ecosystem, but the SD card, even though I personally don't use it, I really think that, that would be a great nod to pros just because, just stick it somewhere. I mean, it doesn't have to be on the smaller model, maybe on the 15 or 16 or 17 or whatever it's going to be called,
Yeah, no, I think exactly that. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's go back to the Mac Pro for a second.
Yep.
One of the things that stand out to you, I mean, look, there's so much to talk about here. I don't want to get into great detail because this is a mobile show, but I want to talk about the fact that I am excited about a few things. Number one, the unapologetic pricing and, no holds barred design and technical, like crank it to 11, that this product shows, right? I think this is exciting. I think, I'm not a PC, gamer or PC, computer builder. So I haven't followed. I don't know what the motherboards are these days. I used to build my own PCs years ago, but I just have this hunch that if you were to price a similar computer and build it yourself, you would probably get very close to the same price. And if you were to price it from another company, you might get close to the same price, but it just wouldn't look and feel as nice.
Yes.
Am I correct on all these two things?
Yeah, I mean, when we priced out a Dell with almost all the same parts where we could, it came out to just slightly more than what Apple was, which was the same result as recent iMac Pros, for example. I think Linus got a much lower number, but I didn't have a chance to sort through the parts that he picked. But I think if you go to any major vendor and you pick the same RAM, like the same ECC RAM, the same Cascade Lake, I mean, this stuff is expensive. Those Cascade Lake processors were announced the same day as the Mac Pro, and the 28-core version is $7,500 just for the core.
Wow. Okay, yeah.
So, I mean, they're going to be pricey machines.
Yeah, I mean, I thought some of the chips might be 2 or 3K. So,
yeah.
So I mean, look, so I get it, but to me, even if you do put together your own computer, you still can't run Mac OS. I mean, you can make a Hackintosh. I've made a Hackintosh. It's fun, but eventually you hit a brick wall of like, this doesn't work anymore. Can't update it properly. Something's broken. And And then the other thing is, you don't get that design. And I know that sounds, pretty, who cares, right? Like, I mean, it's going to be under your desk. You're a professional. You're going to be, it might be in a rack even. I love that they have a rack mount version. This is so cool.
Yeah. That's so cool.
But my point is, I still think design, even though there's the aesthetic design, there's also the kind of, design in terms of performance. And I think this computer to me is just basically a big empty cavity of fresh air, right? And you don't see that as well in other. I always feel like even when I look at good gaming machines, I'm like, how does this work thermally? Like, this doesn't look very efficient to me. Whereas this thing, I'm like, yeah, this is exactly what you do. This feels like to me, they put it in like a wind tunnel, and you do with like a Ferrari or Lamborghini or something, and you're like, okay, this is the best design, ship it. And it just happens to look cool because it's so industrial and so raw,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And because it's Apple and they're making the whole widget, they can really precisely tune everything from the software through through things like metal all the way down to the literal metal of the cards. Like they have two modules so far. One is a programmable ASIC, which is just going to accelerate ProRes encode decode. They call that Afterburner, but I mean they could theoretically program that to do anything. And then the Mac extensible card, which takes two dual AMD cards and it sort of fuses them together with Fabric to get the peak performance they possibly can out of those cards. And yeah, they're PCI cards, but it's Apple putting the enclosure around them and the connection between them that makes them go so fast.
I love the kind of tubular shape, the kind of round rect tube shape of the covers on these cards.
Yeah.
Actually, I kind of love the round rectness, as it were. If I hope my audience knows what we're talking about. Round rectangles.
Yes.
Rectangles around the
Squircles.
corners, which is an Apple thing. The original Macintosh screen, even though it was had square corners, in software rendered round corners, and a lot of the Windows had round rects everywhere. And so to me, I look at this cheese grater design, which is the second of its cheese grater, really, because there was the other one, the original Mac Pro, and the G5 before it, same chassis. You look at them and you're like, the new ones, and it's like in one dimension they're round rects, right? So I'm like, okay, I like that. I think it's clever, And the wheels, there's an option, wheels. I mean, of course you do that. This thing is heavy, okay? Like it's 21 inch by 21 inch by 8.5 inches.
Yeah.
Like just build that out of cardboard. It's a big box.
And it's got a stainless steel frame.
Yeah, so it's not going to be light.
No.
But hey, that's again, it's like you want something bulletproof. When I was in video games, you'll be able to relate to this, Rene. The original Xbox developer kit was a G5 Mac.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
PowerPC.
Yep.
I developed on it, and I used to sit on my G5 Mac often at my desk. Because it's like so rugged, you just sit on it. It's like a stool.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean that's.
Well, I've seen people. There's people who've Pinterest or somewhere. They've bought two of the old cheese graters, gutted them, and put a bench in between, and made it literally their seating.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like they're just unbreakable. Yep. So I would expect this to just be the same thing. But let's talk about what are the standout features for you that you wouldn't maybe see on a regular PC. But they're not necessarily Mac-centric features, you know what I'm saying?
The thing I've always liked, what I've liked about the traditional Mac Pro, not the most recent one, but the ones before that, was that the functionality of the design. When you opened one of those up, it was just amazing. You didn't need screws. You didn't need wires. There was nothing to plug in, plug out. The drive base just slid out. You put a drive in, you slid it back in, and it would connect. You could take the CPU out. Mine was Nehalem, but now I took it out, put in a Westmere, and it just worked. Replace the RAM, replace the graphics cards. You didn't have to feel like you were playing with like a Tinker Toy set. It didn't take time to do it. Just everything was immediately accessible. And this is such a nice return to that. You lift up the handle, turn it, pull the entire thing off, and then you have 360-degree access. And it's a dual-sided motherboard. So you've got your, I think it's 12 RAM slots on one side. So you can go up to 1.5 terabytes of RAM, which is still stupefying to me. Yeah. And then everything else on all the PCI Express lanes on the other side.
And it is when you remove the cover, is it like the Cube where the whole thing just slides up?
Yeah, absolutely.
Ha! I love that nod. That's such a nice nod.
It's so great.
You know, Rene, that I do have a Cube that's souped up.
I didn't know that.
I have an original cube, but instead of gutting and putting an Intel Macintosh in there, like a lot of people have done, I took it to its logical extreme without changing anything that Apple did.
Okay.
I put another video card in there that's passively cooled. I put maxed out the RAM, which is I think let's see, 1.5 gigs of RAM is the max you can put in there. I put a dual-sided what is called the dual-layer DVD burner in there, a super drive, like a slim one, and I put an SSD in there, the maximum capacity. It's not a BIOS because it's a Power PC, but the firmware supports is 120 gigabytes. So I put 120 gigabytes SSD in there on the slow parallel ATA bus. And then I put heat sinks on the VRM and a bunch of other parts to keep the whole thing cool. And I don't know if you know this, but the slot for the processor slot is the same processor slot that was on the G4 Power Mac.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so you can actually use G4 Power Mac processor updates. So I have a dual processor, not dual core, but dual processor G4 daughter card from one of the, Otherworld Computings or somebody like that, that is in there. And because now the whole passive thermal cooling of the whole thing, because of a much faster, it's a 1.2 gigahertz processor in a box that was meant for 500 megahertz processor, and a single processor, and now it's a dual. So I have, in order to cool all that, I have a fan in there. But here's the crazy thing. I don't know if you know this, but Apple engineered this to eventually have a fan. There's a fan chassis in there. You can screw a standard fan, like an 8 centimeter or 12 centimeter fan, and there is a connector on the motherboard that's a standard fan connector that is available and functional. It will kick the fan in when needed, very slowly at super slow speeds. And so it has a thermal sensor on one of the heat sinks, and it just kicks the fan on. And so because it's a chimney and everything gets cooled from the bottom up, it basically cools the video card, the VRM with the heat sinks, and the new processor upgrade. And so the fastest thing I can run on there is a Leopard because, I think Snow Leopard doesn't support PowerPC anymore. But with running Leopard, which as you know doesn't really help these days because most web browsers don't support all the modern features on Leopard. But there's a few people who keep building Firefox for the powered PC, and it's optimized for, you can compile a G5 optimized, G4 optimized version. And the G4 optimized version is still usable. The thing where this thing completely falls apart is streaming anything that's 1080p or higher. Yeah. Like it does 720p just fine. Like you can watch 720p content using VLC. You can watch 720p videos on YouTube with the right browser that's properly optimized and uses a graphics acceleration, but you cannot go past that it starts to fall apart because it doesn't have any hardware decoding of MPEG-4, H.264 or H.265. So it's a fun little exercise. I took it to the maximum limit of what I could do, and it's still fun.
Oh, that's terrific. Oh God, so jealous. That's amazing.
Well, one day, I know it's kind of sad because you're in San Francisco or you're in the Bay Area right now. Yeah. But one day I'll have you come to my place and I'll show it to you.
Okay, awesome.
And
I look forward to it.
We'll boot it together and go, hopefully it'll boot because it's been a while since I turned it on. I had to replace the power supply once because it wouldn't boot one day and I'm like, oh no. So I took it all apart and I looked at it. Nothing seems out of place. Let's put it back together. And I realized it's my power brick that massive power brick the Cube came with?
Yeah.
So yeah. I mean, it's a great product. If you look at how it's made, the screws are titanium screws. So every single one of them. It's like no money was held back. And to me, when I see this new Mac Pro, that's what it feels like to me. It's just like, okay, we're not screwing around. We're just going to do the best we can. And we're going to demand the right price for it. And people are not going to flinch because they need this. Yeah. And they want this. They don't just need it. They want it,
No, absolutely. And I love one of the things about the Nehalem Mac Pro that I got is it's still functional 10 years later. Like it's not completely up to date, but it runs Mojave and it still would beat most modern computers because of the sheer power. And that's what I like about this Mac Pro is that you buy this enclosure and the sockets probably aren't changing anytime soon. PCI Express isn't changing. You'll be able to update this and use it. And it may not be your primary computer if you're like in Pixar or something, but it'll be just fine for a whole bunch of uses and probably hackable for at least a decade to come.
The thing I'm really excited about is they put the I/O on a daughter board because
Yeah.
ultimately, you have those two USB-C ports on the top of the computer, and USB-C is going to be with us for a while. I don't know if those two ports are also Thunderbolt ports,
Yes,
but
they are.
oh wow, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, of course they are. And so, if yeah, of course you do that. So I think the nice thing is the expansion in the back. I mean, it's
Yeah.
possible, 5 years from now when the chassis is still around and Apple's like just iterated on it, you'll get a new expansion board that you can just plug into your first year new Mac Pro and get whatever new port of the day is going to be,
Yeah.
or maybe
no,
they'll have
absolutely.
100 gigabit Ethernet by then,
Yep.
and you'll need a 100 gigabit connection because you're rendering, 16K video or whatever it'll be by then. Probably not. 8K is probably, I think, going to be around for a while. But you know how it is. And this is why a lot of YouTubers that have money shoot red. They're not.
Yeah.
They're not shooting. They're not outputting more than 4K on their videos, which I think is pretty great. I mean, now that I actually have an iMac with a 5K display, and I can watch 4K videos.
Yeah.
It's the only display in my entire house that does 4K. Now I'm actually watching those YouTube videos in 4K, and I'm like, oh wow,
Yeah.
Marquez, you look so good.
He does.
Like I had no idea that you looked so fine. I mean, he always looked fine. It's just like he
Yeah.
looked blurry. Like if you look back
Yep.
to a 1080p after that, you're like, so I'm discovering this. I know I'm slow here.
No,
Bear
no,
with me,
not at all.
audience, but it's amazing. And so for me, I can see how they would want to work in 8K because that then they can do some like Ken Burns and stuff without losing the resolution, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a cool machine. Let's quickly talk about the display because that's also really
Yeah.
kind of insane because they're making essentially a display that if you buy it from Sony, the very well the legendary BVM is
Yep.
a 43K monitor, and this is better in every way, pretty much, right?
Yeah, so they gave us one of those bake-offs where they had a room set up where they had, I think, the Dell HDR display and then the ISO display, which is a few $1,000s. Then the regular Apple 6K display, the matte version, which is nano textured, which is a really cool matte coating.
I know. I love how they did that. It just makes so much sense to me.
It does. It's great. And then they had the $30,000 Sony that's still LCD, and then the $40,000 one, which is OLED. And they played the same string, and you could see right away that the Dell, in order to maintain peak brightness, just completely lost color accuracy. The ISO was just dark and muddy the whole time, and that was even at peak brightness. It never got, I don't think it even got close to 500 nits. The Sonys were really impressive, really good looking, but if there was any amount of white on the screen, the light would change from green to orange, which means no longer color accurate because the
Right.
OLED just can't maintain peak brightness. And meanwhile, these screens can maintain 1,000 nits and can peak at 1,600 nits, but the 1,000 nits is like all day, every day, which is mind-blowing. And
amazing.
all those other displays are 4K. This is 6K, and it's a tenth to a fifth of the price, which is just mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's $1 per.
Yes, it's 6K and 6K, which is Joe Gruber made yesterday.
Exactly. Yeah, 6K and 6K. Is it? No, wait. It's 6K if you want the etched one, right?
Yeah, or you want the regular one with the stand.
The stand, yeah. We should talk about that. I personally, I'm not surprised the stand costs $9.99, and a lot of people are very upset about this. These are never people who will buy it. So
No.
I find it entertaining and humorous that they would be upset.
And they haven't announced the price for the wheels yet, so we don't know that.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
I just think
I
from a
bet
marketing point of view, because people were so happy to announce the stand at the end, I think wasn't a good choice. They should have either not mentioned the price, like they didn't mention the price for the wheels, or they should have waited till the fall because it was the worst thing to say at the end of that demo.
I also don't think they should have expanded and said the price of the Visa mount. I mean, it's obviously just fine. So it's a little pricey, $200. But if you're buying a 6K monitor, $200 is no big deal. It's eventually the price of taxes, basically, in most states.
And because
at
it's
least,
Apple, it's not a regular Visa mount. They have a magnetic, because of course they do.
Exactly.
They have a magnetic
They have an
latch
adapter.
connector.
Right, and I get that. But my point is, and they've always done that, right? They've always
Yep.
had adapters. But I'm surprised that they went with these prices, at least publicly. And more importantly, I am a little surprised that it's $9.99. I mean, it looks gorgeous. I understand that it's very refined. And I'm sure that it's made, it's not cheap to make and you try to make profit on your accessories. But to me, and of course, the entire industry, the people who will buy this, probably have a whole bunch of Visa mounts floating around and don't really need the stand, and they'll buy the Visa mount accessory. But I think to me, the Visa mount accessory should be $99, and I think that stand should be $299, $399, something like that. I think, it's beautiful, it's metal, it's aluminum and stainless steel, and has gears in it and all that fancy stuff. I get it. It's not like, it is not a cheap product, but $999 seems like.
So just to appeal to the old marketing, not that you're old, but the previous marketing, Miriam, I would have just included the stand and then say, if you want to save $800, you can just get the Visa.
Exactly. That's how you do it. Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. Well, they'll learn. I'm sure they read the feedback from the audience.
Well, Phil Schiller will listen to this and smack his head and go, Jaws.
Jaws, yeah.
God, Jaws, change it.
So let's see. So I mean, overall, I'm very impressed. I feel that finally we have a computer from Apple that just doesn't hold back and just goes like, okay, here, you wanted it and we gave it to you, and now, empty your wallets because this is not going to be cheap. And you know what? I don't think it's excessive either. Like, a lot of people are like, oh my God. And I'm like, look, you're not the audience for this. Yeah. If you're a gamer, you're not the audience for this. If you are an individual and you just want, unless you're loaded with money, this is not for you. This is for large, creative studio type environments, video games, movies, music, VR, etc. Right? This is potentially for a small business that has creative needs and has a budget for these creative needs, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I think if you, for a second, balk at the price, you're not the right audience for this product.
If your time is literally worth more to you than money, and you will pay exorbitant amounts of money to save that time, or like to Apple's point was that previously those Sony displays were so expensive, only the color grader could afford to have one, and that meant the entire pipeline wasn't color accurate until it got to the grader. And now, because these are much cheaper than the Sony displays, you can get 4, 5, 6, 7 of them and have everything from ingestion to editing, to all the way through color grading, all equipped with accurate displays.
Yeah, wouldn't it be nice when you import the content and you look at it, you go, this is going to need some particular, tweakings here, and
That's
you can
not
already
the right
tell the
color
color
shirt.
grader. You can tell the color grader guy, hey, we had a problem on set. This is the best you're going to get. Be aware of the greens; they're really bad.
Yeah.
And that's like gold because they can prepare their pipeline. They're like, I think I've seen this before on this shoot. I have a LUT that's ready for this. Off we go.
Or just you don't have a bunch of different people telling you a bunch of different problems that aren't actually true once you see the color accurate version of them.
That's even more important,
yeah.
No, look, I think it's cool. I'm never going to be able I thought I think the trash can seemed a little more accessible back in the day, and I played with the idea of getting one, but this, I'm not even thinking about it. I'm like, one day I'm going to run into one of those set up somewhere in a studio, and I'm going to be like, oh, the want is strong. I'm going to pet it from the corner. I'll be next to it and go, little computer, you are so nice. I will touch you now and be your friend.
Like a Star Wars robot.
Totally. And but that's it for me. I just feel like I just like the Mac's platform, and I really am happy to see Apple just not holding back. And I'm really hoping that these lessons they learned in the last few years by putting themselves in a corner with both the Mac Pro cylinder, and in a way the MacBook Pro, that they will do the same with the next gen MacBook Pro and all surprise us in a delightful way. One thing we didn't talk about on our theoretical MacBook Pro discussion was Touch Bar. Do you think it's going to be an option from now on? I would love for it to just be like you buy it without, it's $100 difference, or something like that.
It's not going to go away because when you look at Sidecar, which is one of the new features they have when you plug in your iPad to the Mac, even if you don't have a touch bar, the iPad doing Sidecar has a touch bar. And Apple internally, like when they announced it, they loved it. They thought it was amazing. And it's probably part of their plans to get into more digital surfaces in the future where like you have a keyboard that becomes a Final Cut pad or an Xcode pad or a Logitech pad with haptic feedback and all that. So it's probably something they're working on long term. So I don't think they're going to get rid of it. But I think you get a physical escape key with every touch bar, and you have the option to just get, all your function keys if that's what you want is the ideal solution.
I would love that, and I also would love, as you said, the escape key needs to come back for sure, no matter
Yeah.
what, and then have the option of touch bar or function keys. But if you get the touch bar, give us haptic feedback. You're
Yes.
doing it so well on the trackpad, right?
Yeah.
Make it so that when I just like cursively run my finger, like maybe make it pressure sensitive, like 3D touch, where if it's just lightly on there, I can kind of feel the texture,
Yeah,
of what I'm
absolutely.
looking at. That would be pretty sweet. But anyway, we'll see. Let's talk about Catalina. So Sidecar, is that what it's called?
Yes.
Sidecar to me is super exciting because I think a lot of people also have like spare iPads that they're not
Yep.
using anymore or whatever. And if you have a spare iPad that supports the Apple Pencil, you can use it as a Wacom tablet for your Mac. I mean, brilliant, right? I mean, that's my point as to why do you need Touch Bar when you have Sidecar?
Yeah. Yeah. No,
It's-
yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's because it uses Apple Pencil to provide the mouse pointer accurate input, but having to navigate is still a little bit of a chore. So I think they hope the touch bar surfaces commonly used commands so that if you are engaged with a pencil, you don't have to put it down, go to the keyboard, do like your your normal keyboard shortcuts. You can just quickly tap the most common shortcuts for any context right where you're already working. And humans are terrible at context changing, so I'm hoping to test that out
Yeah.
and find that it's true.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. So tell us really quickly, like rapid fire, what are the Catalina features we should be looking forward if you're a Mac user?
I mean, the biggest one is Project Catalyst, which is their new name for the previous Marzipan product, which is basically UI
Right.
kit on the Mac, so that all of these iPad apps that developers have been making, and there's millions of them, can be not easily, because some people think it's like Apple does say you flip a switch, and that's true. The same way you flip a switch to make an iPhone app into an iPad app. But once you've got that skeleton, you've got to flesh it out to be a good citizen of that environment. But it'll give you all the basics. And now they also have Swift UI, which is
Oh my God, that's my most exciting thing that I saw,
right,
honestly.
the
As an
declarative
ex-developer,
interface. Yeah,
I'm actually wanting to roll up my sleeves, download Xcode, and play with that because I'm just like, that is what I've been waiting for. I did a bunch of Objective-C iOS apps
Yeah.
back in the day. And in the early days of iOS, like iOS 3 or 4, whatever it was, like back when the iPhone 4 came out. And I was like, this is such a pain in the ass to create an app, like even as a Hello World app. Like, and of course, Swift came along, but creating UIs was still a hassle, and this is just solving the whole problem. It's fantastic.
yeah. And they were showing, I mean, the demo, Josh got up on stage and he showed like a whole page of Swift code and then showed it in Swift UI, and it was like 4 lines because it gives you
Yeah.
so much functionality. Like you get dark mode, you get all of this stuff, quote unquote, for free. And it's one of those things where maybe there are a lot of, like, some people are worried that it's going to make a bunch of really bad Mac apps, and that's possible. But there are a lot of developers who love the Mac, are incredibly proud of the apps they made, but they just never had the time or the the resources to invest in learning AppKit. And it's not the most modern frameworks anymore. And this means they can take all of their knowledge and understanding and experience in UIKit and use that on the Mac. And once they get that app over there, they can put all the passion they have into making it a great Mac app without ever having to go back and learn AppKit. And to me, that's
Absolutely.
phenomenal.
I'm actually excited about Catalyst and previously, Marzipan, because I think that Dieter, is that Dieter who did this on his show recently?
Yeah,
when he
on his
talked
video.
about how they need to eat their own dog food. I'm with him on that. I think there's some really strong potential there, but we do need Apple to jump in and say, do this right, like do it
Yes.
internally and show by example. That's how I feel as well.
Apple
What
is
about you?
always best when they're hitting the bugs in their frameworks first. You can always tell when Apple is, like, Game Center was always garbage because they didn't use it. They had Texas Hold'em back in the day. They never did anything with it, and it wasn't until Lauren Brichter made Letterpress and everything fell apart that they realized the problems with it. And you should never let your developers hit bugs first. So Apple made a bunch of Marzipan Phase 1 apps last year. And they let their designers make a bunch of different choices. Some were effective, some were good, some were bad. They learned from that. Now they have new Catalyst apps like the podcast app, but they're using it, they're working with it, they're making those apps, and they're hitting those bugs. And I think that's great. And this is like a 4-year process, I think. I think Mark Gurman talks about that a while ago. But last year was Apple trying it out. This year, developers get to try it out. Next year, I think it solidifies and goes completely cross-platform, and then year 4 we're there, we've done the migration, and I think that's going to be an exciting era.
No, I think you're right. So other than that, there's a separation of music, podcasts, and what's the other one?
Books.
Books. Thank you.
Yeah.
So they're
Oh,
kind
and
of splitting
TV.
up
Sorry, I should have said TV. Yeah.
They're splitting up the iTunes app. Basically, it's going away,
Yes.
right?
It's not going. So there were some people who panicked over the weekend because a couple sites like 9to5Mac and Gurman put up a thing saying that Apple's going to deprecate iTunes, and then the LA Times wrote that Apple was killing the iTunes store.
I know, that was silly.
It was so bad. But so what's happening is similar to what happened with Photos and iPhoto, in that there are new apps. They'll be installed by default in Catalina. They'll include all your stuff. You can still run iPhoto on Mojave today if you really want to. Like Tim Cook didn't come to your house and delete it off your machine, but they're not going to continue developing it. And eventually, because they're not updating it, it'll stop running in some future version of Mac OS. So they're going to encourage you through features and marketing to get on board with these new apps. And they're good. The music app and the TV app are still AppKit apps. The music app is based on the iTunes code. So people who are worried about playlists or, that's fine. That's all still there. Something they should have done so long ago, though, and I'm so happy about, is they've moved all the device sync stuff to Finder. We really should have always lived.
Oh my God, they did? That's amazing. Yes. Yeah, that is so good.
And it doesn't pop up. You plug in your device and nothing happens unless you go click on that little tab.
Oh my God, so good.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand back in the day when it was initially made, if you have to put yourself in the context of 2000, what is it was 2004, 2003, when the iPad became popular, what was that? Panther, Tiger back then. And people didn't know. They went and bought an iPhone, an iPod, and they bought a Mac, like an iBook, and they plugged them in and they're like, okay, what now? And so it popped a thing and you're like, okay, I follow the instructions and it just works. And you needed that back then. But I think today people understand, in fact, people don't really sync physically that much anymore. So why do you even need to disturb them when they plug in? Most of the time they're just trying to charge at this point, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think this is clever. I'm looking forward to those features. I have to tell you something that you're probably not going to approve, but I'm still on High Sierra. So
no, I just, because my Final Cut Pro machine, I just upgraded that to Mojave. I wait like a year before my production machines move.
I tend to do all my machines to I'm probably going to go to Mojave in the fall, when Catalina is finally available, just because, I don't need it. It's I'm perfectly happy. It runs really great on my hardware. It supports the things I need. And so, I don't need to worry about it. And so I do that. I just keep about a year behind on my Mac OS. And a lot of people are like, you're crazy. And I'm like, no, I'm not crazy. I mean, it's that's the beauty of Mac OS. It's so solid that you really rarely have to be compelled to update right away.
Yeah.
And you can't say that of other OSs, and I love that about Apple,
No, I totally agree with you. And again, if you're in production environment where you cannot afford anything to go wrong, and maybe it's not the OS, maybe just your favorite apps haven't updated for it yet. You've got to wait until everything is, or there's a driver missing for this, or there's nothing wrong with waiting until everything is locked down.
Sure. So the big news for me, other than the Mac Pro, because I'm a nerd and I like hardware, was iPad OS.
Yeah.
And can you quickly run us through what that exactly means? I mean, obviously it's optimized, it's splitting, right? iOS into the phone for iOS. iOS stays on the phone, and iPad OS is now kind of like a fork running specifically for the iPad. Two questions are: give us a rundown quickly of what that adds to the store, to the experience, and two, how do you feel about it?
So I wrote an article back in February of 2015 saying that Apple had to make an iPad OS, and the reason I said that was because iOS is a foundation. OS 10 was a foundation for iOS, but since then iOS has been the foundation for everything from the iPad to Apple Watch to Apple TV, even some of the more obscure stuff. But they all got their own interface layer. Like the Apple Watch has Cascade instead of Carousel instead of Springboard. So if people aren't familiar with it, Springboard was essentially the Windows Manager and interface layer for iOS, and it's been split up now into backboard and frontboard. And every year there's 3 more boards. But the watch, instead of using Springboard, it used Carousel. And TV used headboard and pine board, I think, which is they love to make funny bulletin board and stuff. It's their favorite thing. And they had their own experiences. And iPad didn't. It was very much an iPhone experience. Yeah, it was like an iPhone on iMacs, but it was that experience. And my thing was, when you make it an OS, like when you say watchOS or tvOS, every year at WWDC, you have to get up there and present new features for it. And even in tvOS's case, it was only a few features, but they still had to get up there and present them.
Right.
But with the iPad being iOS, in a year where it was a crunch time and they had to focus on iPhone stuff, they didn't have to mention anything about iPad. But once you say iPad OS, next year they're going to have to get on stage. And it's not going to be like the last few years where every second year we get sort of an iPad update. They're going to have to do something every year. And it encourages them to let it be its own thing. So it's still iOS through and through. Every new feature that iOS is getting, the iPad is getting. And most of the features, except for the multi-window stuff that they talked about for iPad, also works on iPhone. But they're letting it be its own experience. So you can have this multi-window stuff. It can have like the widgets on the screen. It can present its own identity. And I think that was a critically important step.
Yeah, no, I agree. So in terms of features, how like it's focused on multitasking and file management is from what I gather, right?
The file management stuff, I believe, is the same between iPhone and iPad. So you can stick, a USB drive, an SD card with an adapter. You can plug all that in, and it's only documents. There's no executables, so the security model stays the same. And it's it never pushes anything to the system. So like, there's very little chance of like juice jack attacks or things like that. But yeah, so all the file stuff is the same. But now you can sort of put any instance of any app in any side view. So instead of just having like one Notes app, you can have two Notes apps side by side. You can have basically anything you can drag, you can drop into its own window. So Mail, you can drag a message into its own window. You can drag the reply into its own window. You hit reply, that goes away. You can drag notes over in one thing, have two notes in another, drag the Notes app out. It'll show you all, it's like finger painting with Windows, Miriam. It's so hard to describe, but so much fun.
Yeah. That sounds great. I'm looking forward to trying it out, especially on a iPad Pro. And then, of course, the file, now you can read directly from external devices, and some apps support working on external drives as well. Finally, wow, what took so long? It's so weird.
I think they addressed that because Gruber had Craig and Jaws on the talk show last night, and they asked him that. And in some cases, I don't know if this was a complete answer they gave, but in some cases, Apple overthinks this stuff because they don't want to just take the Mac and drop it on the iPad. They want to use iPad as a way to get rid of legacy cruft. Like, is that the best way to do it? Can we make a better way? Like drag and drop, yeah, it's working on the Mac, but we want to figure out what that really means in an iPad context. And also, they do have a lot of security differences between iOS and the Mac, where the Mac, you have to be more careful with Windows too. When you plug in USB, it can actively do things to your machine. And iOS is very different, so they had to figure out a way that it sort of just lets you take the files, doesn't let any executables run, doesn't let anything auto start. So it was probably a combination of them first not really wanting to bog people down with a hierarchical file system, but recognizing finally that people really, some people really just need access to their damn drives.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. It's good news. I want to talk quickly about iOS 13 and watchOS 6, and because, there's some new stuff there. Mostly, I guess, a lot of people have been waiting for this. I think I'm excited about it because I've been using it on Android phones for a while. It's dark mode.
Yeah.
But tell us what else we should know about iOS 13 and maybe, watchOS is a big deal because you can now, it has its own app store and you can now create apps specifically for it, that don't require the phone at all, right? The phone part. So that's a big deal. But I'm kind of curious as to what people will be excited about iOS that maybe, they don't know about or it's not obvious,
Well, let me just stick with the watch thing for a second, because I think what you said is so cool. It's like, we got to iOS. Previously, the iPhone was bound to iTunes. You needed to tether it to a Mac or to a Windows machine and do almost everything through iTunes.
Yeah.
It wasn't really independent. And then with iOS 5, we got iCloud and PC free, and it became its own thing. And now, Apple Watch has been tethered to an iPhone for a long time, and because it's so much more of a constrained environment, it's going to take a little longer than the iPhone did. But people will say, why doesn't Apple just make a watch app for Android? It would increase their market considerably. But I think what Apple wants to do is get the Apple Watch to the point where it's independent. Like, why waste 2 years making an Android version when in 3 years, it doesn't matter what phone you have, and maybe you don't even have a phone, and it can be its own thing. And the App Store, I think, is the net. Like, we had LTE was an important step there, and now the App Store is another one. And we're getting closer to the point where if you want an Apple Watch, yeah, it works great if you have an iPhone, but it doesn't really matter. You can just get an Apple Watch too if you want to.
That's true, yeah. So that's obviously a huge change on watchOS. And, it's not going to impact people too much at first because developers still have to get kind of caught up and start, But there will be at one point some developer that does something on Apple Watch that will just stand out and be like, oh, I now need an Apple Watch with LTE and I want to try this, or I need to try this, Also,
because of Swift UI, you now have first-class apps, because previously the Apple didn't let developers access UIKit. Only they could do UIKit on the watch because they were so worried about power envelopes and like you running out of power by noon. But you can run Swift UI native on the watch, so you'll be able to get like literally like Apple level first class performance out of third-party apps.
That's very cool. So iOS 13, other than dark mode, that obviously we all want. I think we all want. I think it's a good battery saver, and it really helps your eyes. Trust me on this.
Yeah.
I mean, what should people be expecting?
So, because it's you, we'll start with the camera stuff. There wasn't huge camera news because they're probably going to save that for the fall in the new iPhone.
Yeah,
but they're
for
doing
the
sort of. Yeah, totally. But what they're doing sort of for portrait lighting, what they did for portrait mode last year when they introduced depth change. So previously you could just shoot a portrait mode photo, but with iOS 12, if your camera supported it, you could go in and sort of reduce or increase the amount of bokeh on any of your photos. Yeah. Now you have portrait lighting, and there's a new portrait lighting mode, which is, I have to try shooting with it. It's on white, not on black, and it's like, I think they call it monochrome, and it's really cool. But you can also go in and increase or decrease the portrait lighting now for each of the categories. So you can make much more subtle or much more profound effects. And it's all dynamic and live again, which I really, really like.
I can't remember what Android phone I played with recently, because, I play with too many. I think it was a Huawei or Honor phone that had dynamic lighting where you could place the light source, like, after the fact. But it was amazing. Like, you could just say, okay, take a photo, in portrait mode with turn on the lighting feature, and then after you're looking at the photo, you're like, okay, I want the light to come from this angle. It would just do it.
Yeah, we're living in an amazing era of computational photography. I mean, it's unbelievable how fast we're going with that.
I just love it. So okay, cool. So dark mode, some features in camera. Anything else that people are going to learn?
Like machine learning they've done on-device machine learning for a while, but now you can also update the models directly. You don't have to. They can sort of self-learn and self-improve. And Apple's using, I forget what the word was, but they're all using this word this year, which means basically that the machine can understand the important part of anything, whether it's the important part of an audio clip, the important part of a photo. So you just scroll through your photos, it'll hide things like receipts, it'll hide things like screenshots. If there's a person in the photo but it's small, it'll focus in on their face because that's the thing that's important to you, or the human figure in something, just in the thumbnail, so that sometimes you have like a wall of thumbnails and you can't really tell what they are, but it'll make like the ones that look more important bigger, the people in them bigger, so you can sort of understand what's in them. And I think that's perfect for machine learning. I just want it to do all the heavy lifting for me so I can do the stuff I'm good at.
Right. And of course, edge computing is becoming a thing where, a lot of that machine learning is able to function on your device offline. Google made a big fuss about this at I/O for the next version of Android. And I think, obviously, this is something that any mobile OS is going to be expected to be able to do, which is kind of this, okay, here you go. You can now talk to your phone, even when you're on an airplane offline or whatever. Just like you're talking, you and I are talking right now, and it just kind of figures it out, and it has context, and it knows what you're talking about. I think this is truly going to change the game, and I think there's related accessibility features, right, that they announced for at least was that for all OSs? Because I think I saw it on a Mac.
That's really exciting. I was going to say it's really exciting. So what they've done is they started to abstract the interaction layer from the platform. So on iOS, and iPad OS now, and the Mac, you can use voice control. So basically, Windows has had this for a while. I think Bixby promised this. I don't know if it ever shipped or not. but you can say open photos, click on new edit. And if you can't specify something vocally, you can say
It gives you
turn on the
numbers,
grid.
labels.
Yeah. Like on a map, you can say, and it's literally, and they joked about this last night, it's literally like Blade Runner, grid, 43, enhance, 42,
I know.
enhance.
It's so cool. Sci-fi is kind of dictating our future, and at the same time, our future is becoming sci-fi's,
It's so true. So you don't have to touch it. You can use your voice, but also there's mouse support. They basically took the assistive touch feature and expanded it to work with mice. And also they've made first-class keyboard navigation. So if you want to, you can just use a keyboard. If you want to, you can use a mouse. If you want to, you can touch the screen. But it's no longer forcing you to choose between those things. And that, and some people can't, obviously for accessibility reasons, but also if I'm just typing, I don't want to change context because I'll interrupt my thought process. So I might just want to quickly arrow up and go to a different window or something, and you can do all that now.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I saw that demo and I was just like, wow. I mean, not to mention for people with disabilities. I mean, this is like game changer all around. So this is cool. Yeah, very nice. We should switch gears quickly and talk about some newsy things. I know those are not particularly your wheelhouse, but maybe some are something you want to say something about. We got 4 items here. There's basically Oppo, the Chinese phone manufacturer, and Xiaomi, or the other Chinese phone manufacturer, have both within the same day this past week demoed an in-display camera for the selfie cam. So it's under the screen. Have you seen that?
No. Oh no! Yes, I did.
So the cameras are under an OLED display, and the section where the camera is goes black when you start the camera up, and they takes a photo through the display. Basically, we knew this was kind of the end game, right? Yeah. This is where everything is going, and so here we are. Typically when Oppo group, BBK, Oppo, Vivo, OnePlus, that group demonstrates a new feature like this, it takes about a year. Well, 6 months to appear on the first Vivo and Oppo phone, and about a year to appear on a OnePlus phone. So that's what I'm expecting to see. The challenge here, from what I understand, is, and you probably can see that as well, since you're a photo person, is you lose some light, right? Like there is some transparency issues with the display, and so you need a very fast lens and a very sensitive sensor to get, especially in low light, to get the performance you need. But it's easy to correct for issues with color balance and potentially some of that very close to the camera grid or whatever, electronics that might kind of interfere with some of the, in the same way as, there's software algorithm to fix fingerprint smudging on phones today. I think it's very cool. And I think it's, I'm hoping that we see this on an iPhone sometime in the next 2-3 years as well, Yeah,
I'm wondering, we want so much, Miriam. Like we want full display fingerprints so the phone just knows us no matter where we touch the screen, and we want cameras. Like there's just so much we want underneath those screens, and I want to get to the point where every pixel on display is both a camera and a scanner all at the same time, and then I'll be living in the future.
You see, this is what I said this a few years back in one of the podcasts I did, where I think the future is every pixel of the display is a microphone, a speaker, a camera, a light emitting source, and an antenna and a compute unit.
Yes.
So, it's an antenna. So you have an antenna. The antenna arrays the entire display, right?
Yep.
You can tune every pixel to whatever frequency and you're done. I know that's not how radio science works, but as an engineer, I also know that you can bunch a bunch of those together and create the antenna of the right length and tune that. So, it's not like I think this is not unrealistic. It's just we don't have the nanotech to make it happen yet. But
Tony Stark. We need to wait for Tony Stark.
It'll happen where eventually, it'll happen eventually. Every surface of every material is basically a sensor, an emitter, and a receiver and a compute unit for all things.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah, it's going to be great. And groups of these obviously will be able to be turned into, large speakers and high sensitivity microphones because you get the surface area and antennas that can be tuned in size and cameras that, are very sensitive. Like I'm not suggesting that a single pixel is a camera. I'm suggesting the single pixel on the screen is a single pixel of a camera.
Yes.
And that the entire screen is the camera, right? And so it would be very interesting to see how that would evolve. Kind of like what was that company did with the infinitely adjustable focus after the fact?
Oh yeah.
Not Light, the other one.
Lighto? Yeah.
No.
Lytro?
Damn, I'm Lytro. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm totally spacing on that. Yeah. So I think that's kind of cool. So I'll link to a whole bunch of iMore stories, obviously for the Apple News, but I'll link to that story. Engadget did a thing where they covered both the Oppo and the Xiaomi, whereas they were announced like separately. So there are a lot of articles that cover one or the other, but this is the one article I found that covers both. And they're literally both demos of prototypes showing this running. And then the other thing I want to touch on is, remember the Moto mods?
Yep.
Yeah, well, guess what? They're not dead yet. We thought
they're back.
We thought, they're not back, but we thought that last year's Moto Z3 was going to be the last phone supporting mods. But no, as we saw in leaks in the previous couple of weeks, Moto is released the Z4 officially. It is a mid-range phone that costs about $500 and supports Moto mods. And it's probably, of all the Moto mods capable phones, certainly the most up-to-date in terms of specs and features. It is not a flagship, though. It's running a Snapdragon 675, which is not a bad chip by any means. Certainly competitive. It's about the same performance as a Pixel 3a. So should be interesting. I'm going to be getting one, so stay tuned on the show to hear my thoughts on that. What do you think of the mods and all that?
I think it's great. I only saw Hayato's video so far, but it looked like they rounded the corners. So it's like the Apple Watch 4 where it got a little bigger and rounder and it's still compatible, but it's not quite as flatly compatible as previous generations.
Yeah, so it's interesting because if you have some of the older mods, you end up with a bit of a gap at the edge because they did the edges are round now, not flat. But I mean, honestly, who cares? It's just going to work.
As long as they plug in, right?
The only mods you really care about, honestly, are battery mods. There's a really great mod that's like about 3 or 4 millimeter thick that is something like a 2,000 milliamp hour battery and a cheats receiver.
Or if you're Verizon, you just want to market the 5G mod.
Of course. Oh my gosh, what a stupid thing that is. And then moving on to other things. I mean, it's okay. So it's June, right? So that means we have another Galaxy phone on the horizon for the IFA timeframe as usual, and that's the Note. So now there's a whole bunch of Note 10 rumors, and I'll put those in the description for the show. But basically, there are rumors around the battery, cameras, and the charging speed. Supposedly, it's going to support 45-watt charging, which is pretty damn fast. Have you ever used a phone yet with super fast charging, Rene?
No, I mean I've seen them used. I've only had iPhones and Pixels over the last couple of years.
The fastest one I've used is a Vivo with their crazy VOOC or whatever they call it charging. I think it was a 50-watt. And basically the way they do it is very clever. All the charging electronics are in the brick. So it's USB-C, but you can charge the phone on any PD charger or any quick charge 3+ charger from Qualcomm. But instead of basically it's high current charging, where the heat is generated in the brick instead of in the charger module being on the phone. And the way they do it, they parallel charge two cells, right? That's how they get the performance of fast charging. And it's insane. You can charge an entire battery in half an hour.
Yeah, because I still plug my phone in overnight with a 5-watt because I don't want the heat. So that's always been a big concern of mine. And it's overnight, so I don't care how fast it is.
So OnePlus has been doing this as well because they're part of the same group as Oppo and Vivo BBK. But Huawei's been doing it as well. So it's fragmenting the charger ecosystem insofar that these phones are all PD compatible and all quick charge compatible. But they're not, to get that fast speed, you need to use their charger with their cable because for the higher current, it's a special cable. And there's electronics in the cable that make sure that it's talking to the right charger, and then you do that, you plug it in, and magically the thing just charges super fast. The phone doesn't feel warm. It's insane. It's all in the charger. And it's very smart because I think you don't risk damaging the phone or the batteries by keeping. Honestly, that's what Tesla does with DC fast charging on their cars. The charger is all outboard. It's the only time that you are generating heat inside your car is when you charge the slow way, basically the AC charging, where the charger has to convert AC to DC, and there's all kinds of losses inside the car, and there's a dedicated charger for that purpose inside the car. And that's what the old way. That's how the iPhone charges today. There's a dedicated charging circuit inside the iPhone. Of course, there's a dedicated charging circuit inside these Android phones because they also need to support the legacy PD stuff. But what I want to see is a standardization of this fast charge system so that these chargers become interchangeable. And so that's kind of something that Samsung is getting into with the Note 10. Pretty ballsy of them after the fiery Note 7, not barely 2 years ago, I guess, or whatever it was.
I mean, if they yank the headphone jack, they'll have to give the nerds something.
Yeah. Well, that's the other rumor. So they're talking about removing the headphone jack on the Note 10. Let's see if that happens. If there's no headphone jack on the Galaxy Fold, if that ever ships at this point. So who knows? The camera layout looks a little different in the sense that the hole punch might be in the middle of the display instead of the side, and that the pod is very much like an iPhone, like on one side vertically. But look, who cares? The Note is always a solid phone. I'm looking forward to it no matter what they do. I don't think they can screw this up. In fact, after the Fold fiasco, it's in their best interest to really nail the Galaxy Note 10, isn't it?
We've partnered with Nerf, and now the stylus can shoot the tip at your enemies.
Oh my goodness.
I would buy one immediately.
All right, let's move on. We got a couple of more here. No, we have one more. So Goodix is, this is a great story. Ben Sin, my friend in Hong Kong, I've had him on the show. He writes for a number of publications. He has a YouTube channel as well, a very great YouTube channel. And he wrote a story for Forbes about this company called Goodix. And Goodix is today the number one supplier of in-display fingerprint scanners. They're not the one that Qualcomm makes that's ultrasonic, but the one that's optical that, was very abysmal in its early days, but is finding now in its third generation very fast and effective. We see that on the OnePlus 7 Pro. We see that on the Huawei P30 and P30 Pro. And a number of new phones now have this, actually the regular OnePlus 7 as well. And so he kind of talked to them and got a really cool story, like a bit of a backgrounder on the company, the technology. And, it's interesting. We talked about in-display cameras just before there, Rene, because really what those optical fingerprint scanners are in an in-display camera that is optimized for basically super close macro, right? That's basically what it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would usually ask my camera friend Miriam about all this stuff, but I'm just super excited to see the massive amount of experimentation we're getting with optics because so much else about these phones seem to stay the same. Now they're all mature, but the cameras are still an amazing playground.
I agree. Do you think we're going to see a fingerprint reader come back to an iPhone in the future?
So my big dream is, Apple patents everything, so I wouldn't read too much into them patenting full screen Touch ID. But my beautiful dream is that we'll come to a point where authentication is threshold based, and it'll do like Siri will pull snippets of your voice, the M processor will pull snippets of your walking gait. Anytime you touch the phone, it'll pull partial fingerprint. Anytime the camera sees you, it'll pull partial face ID. And based on your location, if it passes 90%, I'm pretty sure this is Miriam, just leave the phone unlocked. If it drops below 70%, prompt for some form of biometrics or passcode. And
I love that idea.
And if it's like gone, say like I'm locking it until you put in your full password.
You know what? I think we're heading there very rapidly, especially on Android, where all these form factors are coexisting now. They're the only devices right now that do a lot of all of that. Like the P30, well, the Mate 20 Pro, actually, an older generation, has the in-display fingerprint, but also has the Face ID style, projector scanner depth sensor in the front. And so it's starting to happen. Android has had this feature that uses gait and location to determine whether your phone should remain locked or unlocked. They call it on-person detection. Yeah. And it's in all builds of Android since, I don't know, two, three generations now. And you can turn it on, and I actually have it on most of my phones, and I find it to be pretty reliable. If I've had my phone in my pocket for a while, I don't even need to unlock it. I just will pull it out and it's unlocked. But if I leave it on a table or something, it requires some sort of authentication.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's starting to happen. Listen, we need to wrap up, unfortunately, but do you want to tell folks where they can find you? I mean, Vector is your big show on YouTube. It's a phenomenal podcast, video podcast. But tell us about that and tell us about whatever else you want.
You can find me on YouTube. It's youtube.com/Vector Show. I still do an audio podcast. You can find Miriam's episodes. They're still all in the archive. Yesterday, I spoke to Sarah Hellinger, who is head of accessibility at Apple. Today, I spoke to Bud Tribble, who's vice president of software, about all the new privacy stuff. So yeah, enjoy and let me know what you think.
Where can folks find you on the social platforms?
I'm the very cleverly disguised at Rene Ritchie on all of the social things.
On all of them. You're on Instagram and Twitter, of course?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, you folks know where to find me. I'm at Tankgirl on most social, TNKGRL, like Tankgirl the comic book.
Yeah.
But without the vowels. So on Twitter and Instagram, that's my handle. If you want, there is a YouTube channel that's a complement to this show. It's youtube.com/Miriam Joire. My name's spelled out. If no spaces. If you don't know how to spell it, just go to my Twitter and it's there. And it's got like unboxings, hands-ons, sometimes interviews, mostly just some devices you can look at for some visual content to match this show. And of course, the show, mobiletechpodcast.com is the URL for the podcast. We're on all the major platforms, Google, Apple, Pocket Cast, Overcast, TuneIn Radio, and Spotify. At least those are the ones I'm aware of. I should probably go digging and see where else people have stuck me. I'm talking out of speakers for a whole bunch of people and I have no idea where they're listening. But anyway, please subscribe to the YouTube channel and tell your friends. Subscribe to the podcast and tell your friends. If you're an old school RSS type person, there is a link to the RSS feed at mobiletechpodcast.com. Finally, I want to thank our sponsor, Audible. Audible.com has been the sponsor of the show for a long time. They are the platform for audiobooks. If you like to listen to books instead of reading them, for a reason, maybe you're driving a delivery vehicle all day and you can't physically read, but you want to listen to a book, there you go, audible.com. And, they have great selection. And most importantly, the thing that really gets me every time is so many of the authors actually read their own books. And it really gets you kind of immersed into their vibe. And I really love that about them. So I want to give them a kudos and a thank you. And more importantly, for you listeners, if you're not with Audible yet, you'll see in the show notes, there's a link to get a deal. And the deal is 30 days free trial on Audible. So try it out. It's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. That's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. Go check it out. Get your 30-day free trial with Audible. And we want to thank them for being sponsors. And we want to thank Rene for being on the show. Thanks, Rene.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's so much fun.
Absolutely. We'll have you on again sometime, probably Apple related, because you're just, really helpful with that stuff.
Awesome. Thank you.
But yeah, let's talk about photography sometime soon. I'd love to do that.
Yes, please.
All right. Well, folks, stay tuned for another show next week. And until then, cheers, everybody.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.